Hi guys. How you doing? Yes, we're on lesson 83. Can you guess what we're going to be discussing? Maybe ships? Maybe navigating ships? For some reason, a lot of people like to make models of ships. They like to try to build ships. And that's what we're going to talk about. He's a guy that loved to build ships. He made models of ships too, just like you guys, huh? But he was afraid because he knew that if he sailed out there on that ocean, it was a scary ocean then. They thought that they would just sail right off the end of the world. And then again, they had heard stories of monsters out there. All kinds of monsters, sea monsters, and mermaids too. Of course, they wanted to see the mermaids maybe, but they were afraid of the monsters. And then they thought if they sailed far enough south that the ocean would get so hot that it would start to boil, and it would boil the ship up and boil them all away, and they would not be able to come back. Some wise tales, huh? That's the way they believed in the 1400s. You know, they didn't have cars and airplanes. They just mainly had horse and buggies and chariots and things like that. And sometimes overland was really hard, so then they thought, well, maybe we could sail there. Well, this young man named Prince Henry, the Navigator, they called him, because that's what he was interested in. And he was a Christian, yeah. He thought, well, maybe I can sail to these lands, and there'll be people there, and we could tell them about Jesus. So he did have a heart for God. But he really, really loved to think about building ships. Well, you know, we learned about another guy, didn't we, that built ships just a couple lessons ago, Zheng He in China. You know, he built all those 300 huge, gigantic football-sized ships and had 25,000 men in his crew. Huge ships for long distances. Well, Europe was a little behind then. They had never seen ships like that before. But we have a guy named Prince Henry, and he's thinking, there must be some way to get over there to the Orient on the other side, besides going over land. You see, travel in the 1400s was really hard because the Muslims controlled the Middle East. And so what that meant is the Europeans going from their land over to China would have to go through the Muslim lands. And they would have to pay what's called tribute, pay money, pay gold, give them something just to cross by. So it became very hard to travel the Silk Road. So they thought about it, and they thought, well, maybe, and Prince Henry lived on the sea. He said, maybe we can find a sea route that went around back that way. Maybe there's an easier way to go to avoid all this, the harsh land and the robbers and all these things that were happening on the Silk Road. You see, back then, they wanted to trade with China. You saw, they were like, the Chinese had things that they never saw before. They had silk, and all the women wanted to dress in silk then, and they had spices to put on their food. They had never tasted food so delicious. And many other products, including gems and beautiful china. Can you imagine? That's what they wanted to trade for. But they also wanted gold and power and glory. They wanted to become rich, and they heard, especially in Africa, that there was some Muslim nations there, and a guy that you heard about named Mansa Musa that was the richest man. And he was getting that gold somewhere. So they thought, if we could sail down the coast of Africa and we could find this gold, we would be rich. We would be rich. We'd find these gold mines somewhere there in Africa. Well, they also heard of this letter, and this letter that was supposedly, they thought, a myth, was given to and went around like a story about a king named Prester John. Prester means Presbyterian. It was in 1165, for a long time ago. But it came from a people called the Ethiopians. And they were supposedly have a huge land of Christians down there. And so they desired to learn about these unknown lands and to see if there were really Christians in the middle of Africa. Well, they never did find, and it became much of a myth, but later on we see that possibly Ethiopians had heard the gospel. But then, again, like Prince Henry and a lot, they thought, we can bring the gospel to Africa. How about that? And so, especially Prince Henry, but a lot of people could care less about the gospel. They just wanted the gold. And then there was those guys that they just wanted to learn about the unknown lands. They were explorers, and that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to find something new and claim these new lands and see new people, and they just had a heart to go out there somewhere and find out if really there were monsters out there, if really they sailed and they fell off the earth. Yeah, they were explorers, and there was quite a few of those guys too. So let's talk about Portugal just a little bit. Portugal, back in the 700s, Portugal wasn't there. Basically, different little kingdoms owned Spain, the land of Spain, and there were a lot of Muslims that came across the Strait of Gibraltar, which was a very narrow strait, across from Africa. And so the Muslims were constantly trying to come into the land that was in Spain there and claim that for their own. So they were constantly fighting against the Christians there. The Christians slowly fought back, and there was a nobleman named Henry of Burgundy. And he decided to help the Christians fight back. And they were all divided in little kingdoms then, and he united them together. And in 1094, the King of Castile decided to reward Henry somehow, to give him land. And he owned the land that's now Portugal. And in fact, he decided that land, that he would give it to Henry. So Henry, as a gift, got the country of Portugal. How crazy is that? I have to take a break.